Campaigning for the 2022 midterms has wrapped up, and with some of the nation's most contested races running neck and neck, supporters of both parties are waiting with bated breath.
Director of Emerson College Polling, Spencer Kimball, has kept an eye on all the major races, and he joins us now to break down Emerson's final midterms outlook and preview potential outcomes of today's elections. Welcome back, Spencer.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to see you. So, what is your polling your modeling suggesting right now? We discussed earlier in the show, the various scenarios. I think everyone expects the House to flip, and then, looking closely at the Senate, a variety of scenarios, but it seems to me at this point like the middle scenario is still pretty favorable to the GOP. What are you reading in the tea leaves right now?
Yeah, I would agree that the House looks like it's going to flip to the Republicans based on redistricting, based on systematically incumbent presidents loses seats during midterm elections. But then we get to these Senate races, and it's going to be pretty exciting in Pennsylvania. Very tight race with Mehmet Oz and John Fetterman. The polling's had that kind of on both sides of the blade, so we'll see where it ends up falling tonight. Georgia's going to be an exciting race to watch with Raphael Warnock, the incumbent. He seems to have fallen a little bit behind Herschel Walker, but the caveat in Georgia is that you have to get to the 50% threshold to win. Otherwise, there'll be a runoff election. We've got two really exciting races out west in Nevada and Arizona. Republicans are looking to pick up 2 Senate seats out west. And these are really key matchups to better understand what I think of the Hispanic voter and to see if that vote is going to shift during this midterm election. And then finally, I think in the Senate, there's a couple of toss-ups that Republicans are looking at, potentially in New Hampshire. There's been some words from Chris Christie that Colorado might be in play, though our polling suggests that Bennett has a 5-6 point lead in Colorado. Same thing up in Washington State. Some folks have Patty Murray in a close race versus Tiffany Smiley. We had that race a little bit higher for Murray, but the main 4, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, probably New Hampshire to keep an eye on as well.
What's the most recent polling that we have out of Pennsylvania, and how much, from your perspective, has the debate, which did not go well for John Fetterman, affected how people are thinking about him in the state?
Yeah, so that debate did have a negative impact. About 50% of voters left watching that debate with a less, impressive impersonation or a takeaway from John Fetterman, and so it hurt him. And we see that in the undecided vote, generally breaking 2-1 for Oz. Now, remember, there was only about 4 or 5% of voters that were undecided, and it's a very close race. And so this one could really fall on either side of the equation. Obviously, Fetterman's been out the last couple of days with endorsements from former President Obama. You had Oprah, and now we'll see if they can get enough votes out of the Philadelphia area to put him over the top.
And is the expectation that a runoff in Georgia would benefit Raphael Warnock?
Well, the expectation is if Brian Kemp was to win that race for governor and Stacey Abrams wasn't on the ticket in a runoff, that the runoff would actually help out Walker because you wouldn't have the enthusiasm from the Abrams group. So it's kind of a tough rub to figure out what would happen in that runoff election. There was that conventional wisdom last time in 2020 where when you had the runoff that it would help the Republicans, and now we have Senators Ossoff and Warnock for the Democrats. So
right, that's why I'm asking. On top of the fact that there has been, Abrams has been a mixed bag, and we've talked about a little bit today, some frustration with Black men who feel like they're being unfairly blamed for her failure to do quite as well as Warnock, at least in the polling. And obviously, in her last election, she's never been successful in this regard. And I wonder whether or not she could actually be a hindrance as much as she is potentially a help here.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because she was considered the stronger candidate coming out of the gate, particularly out of 2018 and 2020. But the political climate has changed a little bit, and she's taken a lot of political hits over the 4 years. She has been a target of the Republican Party, and so those negatives have impacted her, and we see that in her name recognition. Her unfavorables are in that high 40s, and it's a very intense unfavorable opinion. And so she's obviously been in the battle for a long time, and it would be interesting if it goes to a runoff and how her vote would be impacted.
Yeah, what's going on in these gubernatorial races versus the Senate races? I mean, many of them in the same states, where you have Brian Kemp having an easier time against Stacey Abrams, Brian Kemp, the Republican versus the Democrat, than Herschel Walker is against Warnock. Same dynamic, I think, in Pennsylvania, where Josh Shapiro, the Democratic candidate, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think he's more ahead than Fetterman's not necessarily ahead at all. Same thing in Arizona. Kari Lake, the GOP candidate, a very, very full-throated MAGA candidate, actually doing better in her matchup than Blake Masters. It's closer. I mean, these are all very close elections, but in each case, the gubernatorial candidate, it's different. It's out of sync with where the Senate candidate is. What explains what's going on there?
Well, in some races across the country, Democrats and Republicans put up weaker candidates in one of these races to not pay much attention to it. So if we take a look at, let's say, Kansas, the Democrats didn't put up a very strong Senate candidate against Jerry Moran, but Laura Kelly is running for governor and running very strong against Eric Schmidt, and she might get reelected. And so I think that was a intentional move by the Democrats. If we look over at Ohio, we have the flip side, where the Republicans are far ahead in the governor's race and pulling up the Senate race. It's a very interesting dynamic in Pennsylvania, where Shapiro is up in the polling by 6 to 10 points. And the question is the coattails that these candidates are going to have. Look at New Hampshire. You've got a Republican in Sununu who's going to win by nearly 20 points, but potentially the Democrats holding that Senate seat by 3 to 4. So I expect to see a lot of ticket splitting in some of the parts of the country. In other parts, they're going to pull each over the finish line, like down in Florida. DeSantis and Rubio seem to be trending up in the same direction. For the Democrats, that's similar is happening maybe in Colorado with Polis and Bennett.
Yeah, and I saw that you've written recently about the states in which abortion is also more explicitly on the ballot, in Kentucky and Michigan. Also, I believe in California. In Vermont, there's a ballot reform for whether or not it's going to be a part of the state constitutions. And we saw in Kansas that it drove turnout. How do you think abortion is going to play here? Because look, there's been this ongoing conversation about how when you ask people what their voting priorities are, abortion is not among them. However, we have seen it demonstrated in some of these states that it will drive turnout. And it strikes me that even though we say Democrats are making a mistake in emphasizing abortion, and I agree they shouldn't exclusively talk about abortion, but we say emphasizing abortion is a bad idea because people don't rank it as their top 3. On the conservative side, there's been an emphasis on some of these kind of woke political issues, which no one also ranks as their top 3, but very clearly drive people to the polls. And so I wonder what you see as the relationship between those things.
Well, the Kansas vote was really interesting in August because 400,000 people voted to give abortion access, but didn't vote for any of the candidates. Mm-hmm. And so, they blanked the ballot. Where I'm really keeping my eye is in Michigan, because they do have that ballot initiative there to recall I think it's a 1931 law banning abortion access. And so it'll be interesting how that vote goes, because Gretchen Whitmer and Tudor Dixon, the Republican, is a pro-life candidate, I believe without exceptions, and Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent governor, is a pro-choice candidate. And so that's kind of on the ballot, and it'll be interesting to see how that ballot question goes, and looking at those governor results.
Well, our parent company, Nexstar, will have live election coverage of the 2022 midterms. Tonight, News Nation will be broadcasting as well, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. And they are, of course, partnering with Decision Desk HQ to call all of the big races.
They'll also have journalists from across the country, including The Hill. And of course, we'll continue to have all the election coverage we know you love right here on Rising.
Spencer Kimball, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.